For me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
This is the CitizenLink report. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard along with Bruce Hausknecht, who watches over the courts and judicial issues for us. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Stuart.
We've been hearing a lot of experts on television, the usual pundits, mostly talking about, at least from what I've watched, how President Obama's statement on same-sex marriage will play into the presidential election. We'd like to go a little different direction here and take his statement, a few very specific sections of it, and analyze those in light of Christian families who may disagree with the president and how changing the definition of marriage would place the entire weight of the federal government on their heads. First, the president repeated his usual line about how his thoughts have been evolving, and then he says,
over the course of several years, as I talk to friends and family and neighbors, when I think about members of my own staff who are in incredibly committed monogamous relationships, same-sex relationships, who are raising kids together. When I think about those soldiers or airmen or Marines or sailors who are out there fighting on my behalf and yet feel constrained, even now that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone, because they're not able to commit themselves in a marriage.
So Bruce, he listed off friends, family, neighbors, staff, soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors. One has to think that list of people was chosen very carefully to try to tug at the heartstrings, but also there are some folks that he did not mention that this will have an impact on. Who will it affect?
Well, you didn't hear anything about families where faith plays a role in their belief as to the family structure. You didn't hear anything about children who need to be raised by a mom and a dad. And you heard nothing about people of faith and how they're going to react in their businesses and in their churches to these types of new laws, new rules.
And then he made two very clear mentions of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was the rule in the military that basically said if you are a gay service member, as long as you don't talk about it openly and no one's going to ask you about it, then you may continue to serve. Well, they repealed that and basically said you can serve openly in the military now. And also the Defense of Marriage Act, which he kept calling, he said it twice in the course of this, the Defense Against Marriage Act, which of course is the Defense of Marriage Act. And the directive that came from the White House to the Department of Justice to not defend that in court anymore. In fact, you may remember the House of Representatives had to pick up the defense.
Right, and probably he was revealing more than he wanted to by calling it the Defense Against Marriage Act, because basically he and the Department of Justice, by his instruction, have been fighting against marriage ever since that instruction a year ago. And so what we've seen over the course of the last year is further and further intrusions into the rights of family, the rights of people of faith, and those are just incremental steps on the way to same-sex marriage.
Now let's get right to the part where he made the clear statement, the very concise statement, which we've suspected has been his point of view for many years now. He makes a very clear statement about what he thinks about same-sex marriage.
At a certain point, I've just concluded that for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
Now, he used the word personally here. For me personally, it's time to go ahead and do this. That also seems to be taking the minds of the listener a different direction than how this really would impact.
Well, when the president says he personally feels a way or feels that this is a thing that should happen in this country, it gets played out in policy. We've seen it through Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the failure to defend marriage. So when he says he personally favors it, we can expect that personal feeling will ultimately end up in policy, and that's going to impact all of us.
He also mentioned that this is something he feels should be determined by the states, but that runs against exactly what you just said.
Well, the president's contradicted himself on that very issue, because in this recent interview he says that it's a state issue, but then he's also said almost simultaneously that he supports the repeal of DOMA. DOMA has two sections. One is the federal definition of marriage, but the other is the section that protects states against being forced to recognize same-sex marriage from other states under the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. That is a states' rights protection clause in DOMA. And so he can't say that this is a states' rights issue and still advocate repealing the right of states to refuse same-sex marriage. So he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth.
So even as he's making what appears to be a very clear statement about his position on same-sex marriage, he's still kind of obfuscating, kind of hiding how this really would play out and impact.
He is, and even in the defense of marriage cases that the Department of Justice now is fighting and supporting the repeal of DOMA, he's arguing in those cases that there's a federal discrimination clause, the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, and the 5th Amendment also has a version of that equal protection. And he's saying that the states cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation, and yet he's trying to tell the American public that, of course, it's a state issue. So what he's saying and arguing in the courts is diametrically opposed to what he's been telling the American people on air.
Now, probably our folks have seen a lot of the polls that have been out there, and sometimes they show strong support for same-sex marriage. Sometimes they show strong support for marriage as it is. And one of the reasons for that, it all comes down to how that question is asked. If it's brought up as an issue of equality, about making things the same for everyone, people tend to say, yes, I would be supportive of that. But if it's presented as an issue of redefining marriage, the foundational institution of family and society, they tend to say, well, no, I wouldn't support that at all. So it all comes down to how the question is asked. Not surprisingly, the president in his remarks spoke about it all in terms of equality.
I've always been adamant that gay and lesbian Americans should be treated fairly and equally. And that's why, in addition to everything we've done in this administration, rolling back Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so that outstanding Americans can serve our country, whether it's no longer defending the Defense Against Marriage Act, which tried to federalize what has historically been state law.
DOMA does not federalize marriage. What that would mean is that the federal government is defining marriage for the states and enforcing that upon the states. That is not happening under DOMA. States are free to define marriage the way they want.
Yeah. But it does protect the states, as you mentioned earlier, from having to recognize same-sex marriages that are formed in other states where it may be legal. Now, in the course of all this, the president made some statements about religious institutions and how this would affect those. And I get email from President Obama. He writes to me. It's actually the campaign. But it stated it a little more clearly. I want you to pay careful attention to the very specific phrasing in this email that I got that's signed, "Thank you, Barack," just for the record. It says, quote, "I respect the beliefs of others and the right of religious institutions," pay special attention to that phrasing, "religious institutions to act in accordance with their own doctrines." Well, we'd all sit back and say, well, that's great. This is what we want, all of us. We want to be able to continue under the First Amendment to have the religious freedom. But you know what word comes next? But I believe that in the eyes of the law, and that's a phrase we want to hone in on, in the eyes of the law, all Americans should be treated equally. Now, let's talk about this. As far as this change in policy, we'll call it that, by President Obama, a change in his position, his spoken position on the issue of marriage, this has tremendous impact on religious institutions, Christian business owners, Christian families, say a Christian photographer or a Christian outlet that may have a gazebo on a beach, any number of cases. Let's talk about that a bit.
Right. Well, this administration for several years now has tried to limit the freedom of religion and squeeze it into a box called freedom of worship, meaning you're free to worship however you want in your church, but please don't take it out into the world as Christians are called to do. So when he talks about institutions are free to exercise their faith, but what he's really meaning is that the laws we pass regarding what's so-called equality and non-discrimination, all those fancy terms that are used, those really mean that we're going to let one favored group have a status that trumps the First Amendment freedom of religion. And people who believe in the supremacy of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution rightly should take some offense at that.
And some of the stories that we've run in our news outlets here include the ones that I kind of hinted at a moment ago. The church group that had a gazebo on a beach. 2 women come in, say we want to have a ceremony here. The church group says no, they take them to court. You have the wedding photographer in the Southwest. A couple women come in, say we'd like you to photograph our ceremony. Photographer says, you know, I know someone who'll do that, but my beliefs don't let me support that. She ends up in court. We have the Christian T-shirt maker in Lexington, Kentucky, who made a bid on a project, didn't realize fully what it was, apparently, best we can understand the facts. It turns out it was for the local Pride Festival. He said, I can't put my brand on that, but I found someone else who'll do that for the same price, the same bid, and he got dragged before the local Human Rights Commission. That's what in the eyes of the law means. You're free to do what you want in your building, but once you come out here with the rest of us, you're going to be following the eyes of the law.
That's right. And nothing in the First Amendment says that a person of faith relinquishes all of their freedom of religion and religious rights once they own a business. There's nothing in our history that says that, but that's been the talking point of the left now for many years, and they've got us almost believing it. I think we have to push back against that.
All right. Well, thank you, Bruce, for your insights, and thank you for watching. We, of course, will be keeping an eye on this as it plays out over the coming months. Thank you, Bruce, for keeping track of all this for us, and thank you for writing to us on occasion. You may always write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. We appreciate your comments, your questions, your criticisms. We read all the notes that come in. We can't answer all of them, obviously, but we do read every one and like to hear from you. We encourage you to pray for all of us in America as we make a decision in the upcoming election. Pray that we will have wisdom and clarity of thinking as we weigh all the different choices that will be on the ballot in the fall. And remember, stand tall and be heard.